Looks like we have a full house, just about, and we really appreciate your coming out tonight. Welcome to the Tower Club and its International Speaker Society panel discussion tonight on espionage and the effects of espionage on commercial business all over the world. I wanted to tell you all a little bit about the history of the International Speaker Society and what it is and how you might want to get involved with it before we actually turn to our panelists, and I don't intend to take more than a couple minutes. The International Speaker Society is a new membership-based group here at the Tower Club. This is literally our launch. This is our first event, and we hope it'll produce the kind of membership interest that will stimulate a lot more activity and many more of these kinds of presentations, what we consider really quality programming that would enhance the membership experience here at the Tower Club. And we want to engage members and prospective new members in stimulating topics in the international canopy. We want to have people involved to the extent that they're not just coming for events to listen, but to participate, which I hope all of you all will do tonight. Our panelists are ready for you, and I think that you may be ready for them. You've read about them in our flyers and in our marketing materials, and I hope that you will enjoy a stimulating presentation tonight and involvement. Just to let you know how we got started, we who have organized this event are a 4-member founding steering committee of myself. I'm the temporary chair of this committee, which we hope will blossom soon into a fully blown, blessed society within the club. We are right now in a pending status. But we think after tonight's event, the quality of our programming will be accepted unanimously, we hope, by the board of directors and its new chairman, by the way, Pat Messini, who's here with us tonight. Pat. And that we can really get into some great things for the future. We plan once a quarter to have one of these events, but that'll be a function of the involvement that people at the Tower Club and prospective new members as well might want to have in its future development. So it's consisting of myself, Cynthia DeLorenzi, Cynthia, who is our public relations and speaker liaison, Rokas Berezniovas, Rokas, who's our outreach director, and Luke Bencie, one of our speakers later on tonight, but also our topics director. We appreciate all of the effort that has gone into this by not only our founding members, but by all the people who have helped us on the sidelines, including Sarah Aurier, I want to recognize, who's been an outside consultant for marketing and events planning, who has brought to light a lot of important factors about how to do social marketing for events like this, and has really helped us to reach out to persons beyond the membership in the Tower Club, and have them invited. I think half of us here are members and half aren't, and so we really appreciate that kind of attendance by those who are not, and we hope that you'll become not just prospective members, but actual members in the near future, because we'd love to get to know you, develop our relationships together, and who knows, maybe even do some business together someday. That's really the kind of trilogy we are on here at the Tower Club. We build our relationships first. we get to know each other. We really can't, we know where each other lives, so we really can't screw anybody around. So we therefore become automatically super qualified for doing business together. I also want to thank a membership director here, Renee Cummings, for having led me to this outstanding group of founding members of our team. She literally led me by the hand to every one of these fine people. And between the four of us, we hope to stimulate much more activity from other members of the Tower Club, and also who will become members of the Speaker Society. Now, with that, I want to introduce Cynthia DeLorenzi, who I mentioned earlier as a member of our founding group, but who's also going to be the moderator of our panel tonight. Cynthia is the Chief Executive Officer of Success in the City, a networking organization for senior-level executive business professionals in the D.C. metropolitan area. She's an international motivational speaker. She's an interviewer and moderator. She's a social media expert and consultant. And it goes on, and she's a producer. She's an artist. She's everything. She's dynamic. And she has really done a great job bringing us together in the group. She calls herself a serial entrepreneur and social commentator on the status of executive leadership in our world and that impact our culture and economy today. She's been recognized by Washington Business Journal as among the top 25 women who mean business. She's been recognized by the Smart CEO magazine with their Brava Award and also in their Circle of Excellence. And she's been recognized by the Enterprising Women group. And I could not be happier to introduce her to you and give the microphone over to Cynthia DeLorenzi to introduce our panel.
I invite our panelists to take a seat. It's my privilege and honor to be here tonight, and I'm so glad my husband's in the room. I told you I was special. I keep leaving him stuff around the room, and he just throws away the yellow pieces of paper. So anyway, thank you, and thank you for being here tonight for me, honey. So let me introduce our panelists, who are incredible, and I know them all personally, and they're pretty darn impressive. So to my right is Lottie Carbolosa. He's a fellow Italiano. I met Lottie through the FBI Citizens Academy, and he is the guy who helped, and I think Pat was in that class with us and a number of friends, and he was the guy that let us have actual weapons in our hand. I don't know what they were thinking, but they seemed to think they were loaded too, and we did shoot guns, yeah. It was a pretty fun day, though.
Were the guns loaded or the girls?
Yeah, I think the guys were loaded and the guns were loaded. That's the only way to get through it. But anyway, Lottie is a retired FBI special agent. He was interim deputy director of law enforcement for Counter-Terrorism Center of the CTC, CIA Army officer, financial consultant with Shearson Lehman Brothers, and owner of Spectrum Insurance and Financial Services, LLC in Florida. He has an extensive background in risk management, team building, steering international and domestic operations. He has a proven track record in safeguarding people, assets, and facilities. And I'm going to give you each just a very small snapshot of what each one of these incredible people do that's on our panel tonight. Next to Lottie is Luke Bencie, and Luke is the author of the book Among Enemies. And I encourage you to get a copy of this book tonight, because this will be a collector's item, because inside the book, any book you write when you write about the CIA has to be approved. And the CIA, when the book was published, missed something. So it's got something that's been hand redacted. So I would encourage you to get this and get it signed tonight, because you'll have that on your shelf. So, and we have that out here. You can also get your own Spy versus Spy hat. So we've got some cool stuff out there. So I encourage you to go out there. And I appreciate that, Luke, you pointed that out to me. So anyway, for the past 15 years, Luke has traveled more than 100 countries with his beautiful wife, who's here in the front row, on behalf of the U.S. government, as well as for private defense industry. He has experienced firsthand, and sometimes painfully, the threat of espionage. He has seen the lengths to which foreign intelligence services and other hostile global competitors will go to steal American business assets. And at the very end, we have our friend, Brian Finch, who is a partner at Dickstein Shapiro. Brian is a partner at Dickstein Shapiro in the Washington, D.C. office, is head of the firm's global security practice. He was named by Washingtonian Magazine in 2011 as one of the top 40 federal lobbyists under the age of 40. Mr. Finch is a recognized authority on global security matters who counsels clients on regulatory and government affairs, issues involving the Department of Homeland Security, government, Congress, the Department of Defense, and other federal agencies. His focus include liability mitigation, protection of critical infrastructure, state and local grant funds, WMD, weapons of mass destruction, response preparations, chemical security, cybersecurity, and border and trade security. Brian also reports on Fox News regarding national security. So he may look familiar to you because you've seen him on news. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
So today, as I was preparing to come to this conference, and I'm one of the people who gets a lot of information from Google, Google reported that, which they have, and all of the companies like Google are reporting after the Edward Snowden incident that, wait a minute, we're not the bad guys here. We weren't freely giving our information. We've been requested through security purposes to hand over information. We don't do it willingly. We have to do it. I actually used to run an internet service provider company. And so you would think that since that report came out about Edward Snowden and all the outcries of people's response to it, that they would have fewer requests. Actually, their numbers have doubled in requests from governments around the world for information from everybody out there at Google and these other companies. So I thought that was really interesting. So one of the things in preparing for this panel discussion today, because I was thinking, what is security about? It's not about us. It's not about everybody. Oh, by the way, how many people are spies in this room? I just want to know. They're pretty good. They didn't answer. I thought I'd trick them. But one of the things that really surprised me in conversation with you is that I was thinking, I'm not part of the story of security and cybersecurity. I mean, who cares what I do? I mean, I always say that if the NSA was tasked to listen to my phone calls, they would probably be crying and consider it punishment. But in listening to these guys, we are actually all part of the story of espionage. That no one person, so let's start with you, something, Lottie, that you said, which kind of really surprised me, is that it may be not what I do, it may be not what Pat does, but it may be who we know. That somebody may say, somebody may want to get to know you, and they go, and we're out there everywhere now. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, I'm out there on Facebook, I'm everywhere, and somebody go, hey, I see that Lottie, he's worked for the FBI. Yeah, I couldn't go up to him directly because he'd be suspicious, but if I was a friend of Cynthia's, yeah, Cynthia's having that event. Lottie's going to be, I have some people signed up tonight. They may want to get to know you and say they know me. Who told Lottie that they know me? So you think about it, but he was telling that. So tell us a little bit about some of the things you did in your job.
Should I unfriend you?
Yeah, probably. If you were smart, I would.
Well, it's funny because when we're speaking, here's a concept, and I know there's a lot of folks in here with very similar background that probably could write books and teach me a lot of things. And there's a lot of people here with a great background. Think of it as a spider web. Okay, all you are is a strand to that spider web. You really don't know where it's going to lead or where it's going to go, but it's a big, big spider web. And in the center of that spider web is somebody called a collector. Okay? And that's really how you have to look at everything that you do. There's a spider web, and everybody in here is a little different strand, right? Maybe running parallel, maybe running across each other and stuff like that. And so that's really what you have to be concerned with. Is not always, you may not be the target, but someone that you know would be a target. They may be using you to get to somebody else, or at least developing a profile of you to know your habits, to know that who you're associated with, right? Birds of a feather flock together. So how do I get to you in order to get to me? So that's a little of an analogy. I don't know if it makes sense to anybody. Like a little spider web. You ting on one side and it goes somewhere else, right?
So that was really interesting. So you kind of got the analogy here that, okay, so we all exist in this world, and somebody may have an interest in somebody that we're connected to. We have no idea who's checking it out, but they're going backtracking those connections. But then Luke, when we had a conversation, which was where my job just began to drop, was that everywhere we go, so we think that really it's governments spying against governments. But the story is really bigger than that. It's governments spying on our businesses, on what we do, on how we do it, and what we need to know, and how you think that we as business people, when we travel, what we should be doing. And I'm one of those people, like I'm international travel, and I go around and I speak in other countries. I bring everything with me. I bring my laptop, my iPad, my cell phone, anything electronic I can get my hands on. And after speaking to you, I probably would not do that anymore.
No, I think there's a big misconception that the only people that get spied upon when they're overseas are diplomats or FBI agents or CIA officers. Those are the ones, the main targets, and really that's not true. In fact, there's pretty much three people who are going to be doing any kind of espionage against you, and that is a foreign intelligence service of another country. It's going to be a business competitor, or it could be what we call a private collector, a person who is just out there just trying to suck up as much information, sell it to the highest bidder. And the misconception, that it's just the diplomats who are the ones who are being followed or put under surveillance, or their emails are being read, or someone going to a hotel room, is now the business traveler. And we hear all the time, oh, I'm a sales rep. I go to Paris every month to see a client. Why would a foreign intelligence service want to spy on me? And as Lonnie points out, it is constantly sucking in as much information as you can so you can build that diagram, you can build that network. And as we know here in Washington, D.C., we're everybody in this room probably knows someone who works at a defense contractor business, or they know someone with a secret clearance, or they know someone who works for the government. And again, it's just connecting those dots is what it boils down to. So now more than ever, business travelers are the ones who are targeted, even more so, just numbers-wise, than govies.
That's really interesting. So Brian, when we were talking, one of the things we were talking about in our conversation together was the fact that when we look at the outcry against espionage, that everybody's taking the high ground that it's America. It's America that's wrong, that we are doing all this, that no other country's doing it. But you said we need to take a little bit of a different view on this.
Right. First, I'm going to open my remarks as if I were beginning a conversation with my wife or my mother, which is to say I'm going to start with an apology for my voice. In this case, since I caught a nasty cold when we were at Disney World a few weeks ago, so I apologize for my scratchy voice. And when we're talking about espionage, I also can't open any remarks without, especially because I'm Jewish, without making a self-deprecating remark. And note that the last speech I gave on cybersecurity and espionage was in Texas to the Gas Producers Association. And when my 9-year-old heard that I was giving a speech to the Gas Producers Association, she said, "Are you getting a Lifetime Achievement Award?" The answer was no, and thank you. It's very interesting because, yes, there is a lot of holier-than-thou commentary that's going on throughout the world with respect to what the NSA is up to, and American intelligence, military, and law enforcement operations generally. The fact that we are voracious consumers of data, much of which is out in the public eye, yet we still collect it, whether it's Twitter feeds or Facebook information, et cetera. And, we're spying on foreign governments. How dare we do that? And there is this sense that America is losing a bit of the moral high ground when it comes to its intelligence operations, and particularly when it comes to electronic or cyber gathering of information. That's public opinion. The reality is that if you look, a very large part of what the National Security Agency and other arms of the federal government are doing, they're collecting national security information. They're collecting information that's aimed at detecting and preventing terrorist incidents, or trying to understand the motivations and the actions and the potential moves of foreign governments that are or potentially could be our enemies. In contrast, when you talk about the Chinese efforts with respect to cyber espionage, it is national economic policy to conduct cyber espionage, which is to say the Chinese conduct cyber espionage to gain intellectual property, to gain trade secrets, to gain business practices, to gain important information that they can use to conduct better deals. The NSA does not go out and collect emails and intellectual property from Jaguar. It doesn't do that from Land Rover. It doesn't do it from Toyota. That's not what it's about. It's about protecting America, and we can have our debates about how far we should go in protecting America and types of information, but The Chinese do that as well. They're spying on our military, and they're doing it quite successfully, but they're also spying on us commercially to gain advantage in things like cell phones or in automobile parts, et cetera, so that they can make the product cheaper, better, and faster, or at the very least, skip a few generational steps in the natural evolution of their economic engine and catch up more quickly and be a direct competitor to the United States, if not overtake them. So that's an important part of what we have to remember when we have our next Snowden release on what the NSA is up to. Is, you got to keep in mind, look, this is for national security purposes, and everybody else who's complaining about it, they're doing it so they can make more money.
Really interesting. So we're not the only ones in the game. Everybody's spying. So Luke and Lottie, one of the things you shared with us is that when you travel overseas, and if you can't, we've all agreed that they cannot necessarily respond to everything I ask. So by default, it's going to be Brian. So just so you know. But when you travel, what should you know? I mean, as a business person, when you go over there, I mean, tell us what's happening now when we get ready to get a flight. Like when I go to Paris or I go to Switzerland, I'm going to be maybe going over there, in a few months to speak. And what should I be prepared for?
Well, I was going to say, in our book, we have 2 basic rules for every business traveler. And rule number 1 is always assume that someone has you under surveillance for your intellectual property. And then rule number 2 is to think and act like a counterintelligence officer. And I know that folks in the room there's some military folks and intel folks, and you guys have had OPSEC training. I'm sure you remember that from some of the military days. We heard that on television. But what we're talking about now is counter-espionage, which differs greatly from counterintelligence. And the things that we're talking about is how do you protect yourself from elicitation, meaning that you're on an airplane for 8 hours flying an international flight, person sits down next to you and starts asking you these open-ended questions, and over a few scotches on the plane starts sucking more and more information out of you. And I'm sure some of you may have heard the urban legend, which was actually confirmed 3 times by the former director of the DGSE, the French intelligence service, Pierre Marion, who stated, including once to CNN, that of course we spy on our American counterparts. Even though we are brothers in arms for intelligence and military operations, we do spy on you, America, for your intellectual property secrets. And you may have heard the famous story of all of the seats on the Concorde used to be bugged with audio devices. Those are the most important businessmen going from the United States overseas. There'd be an audio device in there, as well as on all the business class and first class flights of Air France. And you'd have this beautiful flight attendant who, sure enough, would walk down the aisle and put her hand on one of the businessman's arms and say, "Oh, sir, what hotel are you staying in while you're in Paris?" "Really? I'm staying there as well." And then you find that businessman would then find himself wound up in what we call the honey trap or the honey pot, where essentially he is going to be blackmailed. And I don't know how many people here have been to Southeast Asia or to China or any of these countries yourselves, but particularly in the Eastern European countries or in the stands, you may get a knock on your door at 3 a.m. From a beautiful woman, guys, who is standing there in a lovely evening gown saying, "Oh, I'm compliments of the hotel, I'm here to give you a massage, blah, blah, blah." And what happens is your room is wired with audio and video devices. And a couple months later, when that businessman is back at his desk back here in lovely Tyson's Corner, he gets this anonymous email with a video. And he opens it up, and it's him with this young lady. And it says, "Unless you would like this to go to your wife, your boss, your church, I think you should start sending us your R&D plans for your latest iPhone, iPad, whatever technology you're working on." And this happens every day, not just here in our area where we have so many folks in this industry, but all over the world.
How many guys has that happened to here? That happened to you, Tiffany?
Never happened to me, I never opened the door.
Just checking.
I would go along. Open the door, I'd check it, there's nobody there.
What about you, Larry?
I'm not allowed to go without you.
Yes, sir.
So if the French are spying on us, and I presume Germans, English, everybody else are, then are we losing the PR battle because we're getting called out time and time again? We're not calling out others other than China. We call China all the time, but Europeans, we don't tend to be as aggressive with.
Well, I mean, as Lottie was saying, we don't spy. I mean, we have the 5 eyes, the countries that we don't spy on. But we do have, and probably Brian's best to address this, the 1996 Economic Espionage Act, which came out to say that we are going to prosecute anybody who steals our intellectual property. And I think what Obama, in the beginning of this year, signed it, that it's now 3 times of anything that you steal. So if someone steals $30 million worth of intellectual property from an American company, we turn around and sue for $90 million. But you've got countries, like you said, like the Chinese, who just, they ignore that. That's American legislation. Why should we care about this? So the economic espionage has certainly not been the great piece of legislation that we've had out there.
Well, part of the problem is, first of all, yes, we are losing the PR battle. It's as simple as that. And, again, holier than thou. Europeans love to be holier than thou against their American cousins. And such is life, and, you can ascribe it to whatever you want, including 24-hour media cycle in the United States, which is not a very good response from the Obama administration, but it is what it is. We've lost the PR battle. When we're talking about the theft of intellectual property as well and prosecuting it, that's good, and we can do that, and we've done that successfully in the past. The problem, particularly in the past few years, with the theft of intellectual property and business information via electronic means, i.e. cybersecurity, most companies, most businesses don't realize that their intellectual property has been stolen. That's part of the challenge. Even if they realize something has gone wrong and data has been compromised, the attribution element is incredibly difficult. One of my clients was giving a speech this morning that I was watching, and he had a great quote from a Navy admiral. Said, pretty easy to tell who launched the ballistic missile. It's awfully difficult to figure out who launched the cyber attack. And so when we're talking about the theft of intellectual property in trying to prosecute that, yes, there are companies like Mandiant and Fidelis and others who are pretty good at attribution, but a lot of that depends on a business being cognizant of the fact that they have been attacked, much less successfully attacked. And we're getting greater recognition amongst businesses that they are under the potential for cyber attack. But the reality is that most don't even think about it. And I was looking at the Verizon data breach report for 2013 earlier today, and this should be sufficiently alarming. Over 2/3 of data breaches go undiscovered for months, if not years.
So, follow-up question, is the 3 a.m. knock at the door or the cyber knock at the door a worse problem?
Well,
Yes.
Yes.
all breaches are created
Yes.
equal.
Yeah.
They're done for two different purposes.
So it's kind of interesting, Luke and Lottie, you both do consulting for business people who are traveling, right? And maybe even here in the country. Tell us a little bit about what that is and who needs to consider using you. And why does somebody, what do they have you do? If you're going to bring somebody to be on your team because you're doing something, kind of give us a scenario of what that's about.
Well, it's not all about me, but I just want to mention one thing. One of the last jobs I had in the FBI, I actually ran the FBI's Overseas Awareness and Protection Program. So all of our folks going overseas, all of our contractors, everything else like that, I was responsible for letting them and informing them really on situational awareness. One of the things that you guys keep talking about, intellectual property, right? Think about it. The Chinese are our competitors, the French are our competitors. It's more about them getting a competitive edge on you as much as it is about the sensitivity, about the special data that you might have, the technology that you have. You're looking to see how do you bid it, how do you structure it, how do you analyze it. They want to get into your head to see how, as a business, you structure your strategy, and that's as big as the intellectual and the technology that they want to steal from you. They want to know how you work and how you operate.
Our videographer wants you guys to have the mics because they're.
Besides the one I already have on?
Yeah. I patted you on the back of the head there, so when you speak, I'm gonna let you guys, I speak loud enough. So who is it though that wants tell us a little bit about the scenario of a business person or a company that's going to have you. How is there a job that your job is to provide protection or security? Are you providing protection or security, or what are you doing?
Well, so it's a few things. So let's say we have government clients as well as, we send out first-time govies to go overseas. We give them training. But so for example, a client may come and say, we're doing business in Japan. We've got a big negotiation we're trying to do out there. We're trying to win a project. So we'll do, first of all, a country assessment to see what their actual espionage threats are in that country. And Japan, interestingly enough, as an example, we're throwing around terms, espionage and all that, and you may hear economic espionage versus industrial espionage. So there is a slight difference between the two words, even though they're used interchangeable. Economic espionage usually involves a foreign government or foreign intelligence service conducting some kind of espionage against a business traveler or another government. Industrial espionage is more when a business to business conducts that kind of espionage. Now, that's not to say there's not former intelligence officers that may work for this private entity. But going back to Japan, Japan is the one country that practices more industrial espionage, meaning business to business, vice economic, where it's an intelligence service. So if we have a client who's going to Japan, we'll say, you're going to go to Japan, you're going to do these business negotiations. Well, first thing that's going to happen, they're going to bring you into the waiting room of the lobby. You and your business partner are going to be sitting down. A nice young lady will bring you a cup of tea and say, gentlemen, please wait here. Our conference will start in the conference room in another 10 minutes. Please enjoy this tea. And while you and your partner are there sitting next to each other saying, all right, Lottie, we're not going to go lower than 26 million for this deal. That's our budget. Our chairs are being with audio devices in there, and the guys who we're going to negotiate against are listening in on this in the other room. And it's one of these cases that it's, shame, it's not, shame on you. It's always shame on us for being so foolish to not know. So every country is a little bit different. Every country has their specific threats. And that's why you can do a general OPSEC or general kind of counter-espionage training, but it's better if you can pinpoint what the threats are in every individual country.
So it's going to be different. So should we assume when we travel that every hotel we check into is going to be bugged, maybe with audio and video?
That's a good question, and the short answer is yes. Always, you want to make that distinction, but people always say, "Oh, that's ridiculous." When I go overseas, I'm a Hyatt member, I'm a Hilton member, I stay at an American chain. I don't stay at the local hotel in Casablanca. Well, the difference is, when you are overseas, these hotels are individual franchises, meaning that a local can buy these. Most of the time, it's the MOI, the Ministry of Interior, which is the subsection or the umbrella organization of the intelligence unit. So they will usually own it, or they'll have a cutout businessman who they front the cash to. He then purchases the Marriott, the Hilton, the Hyatt, whatever hotel it is, and we'll probably edit this out of the camera in the back too, so we don't get a lawsuit from those chains. And what they'll do is not every room is going to be bugged. I mean, there's going to be specific rooms in there for that specific use. And if you ever notice, when you travel to an international hotel, they always photograph your passport. We don't do that in the United States, but always overseas. And the reason for that, I mean, the main reason, they'll say there's all these other things, but the main reason is there'll be a representative from the MOI, the Intel Service, who come by every night or maybe at the end of the week, and their division of that intelligence unit, just to go through and see who is staying in these hotels. Are they Americans? Are they whatever? What are the stamps in their passport? Can they build again, going back to the spider web, where else have they traveled to? So all these things are of importance to hotels. So yeah, there may be one or two certain rooms, but one thing to remember, you are from Washington, D.C. You are from the Beltway. You are 5 miles down the road from the CIA. You are going to be under assumption that you work for an intelligence service when you go overseas, and it's your job to be boring and prove them wrong. One of the worst things you can do, and this happens all the time, we'll give a course on, there's audio and video devices in your room, and sure enough, you've got some idiot who's on his bed in his sprinkler looking for a camera. Now suddenly, if there is other video devices in the room and they see some guy in his underwear looking in the sprinkler for a camera, suddenly the guys who are watching the monitor on the other end are saying, is this guy for real? This guy must be a CIA or an FBI guy. He's looking for cameras in his room, and it's just some yahoo, civilian who took a class or read a book and now they're doing this. So we always say, do not look for any audio devices, and you may find yourself under surveillance as a regular citizen on business. And the worst thing you can do is confront or try to provoke a surveillance team. And there's, I don't want to go on another topic, but we'll leave it at that.
So what country, got a question?
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, does that only apply to business professionals? For instance, I just came back from spending a year in Moscow and studying there for my graduate degree. And I was told before I went, don't do anything stupid, don't say anything stupid. But ever since I came back, my laptop has defaulted to Russian. And I mean, I understand Russian, so it's okay. But even my calendar and my Gmail, I try to fix it constantly, but it defaults to Russian. And even though I was a grad student, I lived in D.C., so I wasn't sure if that actually applied to students as well as, is it the proximity, or is it just nationally they would do that to anybody?
No, it's nationally because you have an American passport too. You could be an NGO and they're thinking, oh, this NGO is a cover for the CIA. Or a student coming in, and Lottie, I know that the FBI goes around and gives a course on a specific case where a person went to Russia, they tried to recruit this student, or it was China, I think. They tried to recruit them and said, hey, we're going to fund money. When you go back, you're going to get a job with the State Department. We're going to fund it and everything. And then it became, hey, why don't you set your goals a little higher? Instead of working for the State Department, why don't you work for the CIA? And the goal was to get this student, fill them with cash, get them prepared. They go apply for the CIA. They get into the CIA, and they're building these long-term moles in different government agencies. So yes, students, teachers as well are a big target, and I can talk about how these teachers get a phone call, hey, come over and consult for us. And that just opens a whole Pandora's box of people who are unprepared.
Trying to get rid of my laptop, is what you're saying.
Just start fresh. It never hurts.
So where is the biggest threat? Who's the number one spyer in the world? Who's the best at it? And where's our biggest threat coming from?
Well, it's different for different things. I mean, cyber.
Can Brian touch that one?
Is this a Brian question?
Is that a Brian question? Yeah.
There's a lot of really good spies out there. Chinese and the Russians are quite effective at what they do. The Iranians are getting increasingly sophisticated. Surprisingly, the North Koreans are actually getting pretty sophisticated as well. They just put out a tablet, kind of an iPad knockoff, that someone did an extensive review on. They said, this is actually a fairly good tablet. And it's got a copy of Android software on there and Microsoft Office, which I'm sure Microsoft is very happy that they have an unlicensed copy of Microsoft Office floating around Pyongyang. But they're the Indians, the Pakistanis, the Israelis are really, 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 really good. But we also consider them good guys. Again, I say that because I'm Jewish, but they tend to be good guys and gals when it comes to those kinds of things. But really, right now, I mean, most of what you see comes out of China and Russia at this point. But the interesting thing to remember is that, for years, since the end of the Cold War and forever, really, there's always been this sort of black market arms trade that's out there. If you want to get something, you're going to get it, whether it's landmines or automatic rifles, machine guns, parts for missiles, etc. There is now a cyber black arms market out there too, which means that you don't have to be in the Russian government or the Chinese government or be a corporation affiliated with either of those in order to get your hands on something pretty sophisticated that you can use to conduct espionage. And to me, that's one of the scariest things about the cyber electronic threat is that pretty much anybody with a credit card and a little bit of knowledge on where to look can get the stuff needed to spy on practically anybody. And coming up with these kinds of tools, especially for people who do this for a living, isn't that hard. And they know how to defeat fairly standard cybersecurity tools. If you're buying your firewall or your antivirus system from Best Buy or H.H. Gregg in a box, save your money. It's not going to work very well, especially if you're a business. You need to have some pretty sophisticated defenses. And you have to recognize that there are people out there who, even again, if they're unconnected to a government, but they want to do something bad to you, they have the capability to go hire somebody for a really inexpensive amount to spy on you. Two great examples are, there's a scam going on right now where we talked about LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter, et cetera. In the spider web, one of the things that adversaries look for, or criminals look for, is they look for connections. So you're on Facebook and you say, oh, I'm at business X and I'm, whatever, and then they follow up the chain and they say, okay, here's the CFO and then here's the CEO. And then you can go out for free on the internet and get an email spoof software, which basically, we've all gotten this where it looks like, why am I getting an email from myself about, penny stocks or something else, that type of thing? Clearly, I did not send this. That's spoofing. Well, what they can do is that they can figure out who the CEO of your company is, spoof his or her email address, and then send an email to the CFO saying, hey, we need to transfer $150,000 to this bank account. And we need it done right away. And sometimes the CFO says, okay, boss, whatever, and doesn't even bother to respond. Sometimes they email back, and the bad actor is in control of that email address. It's not actually going to the CEO. It's going back to that person in Nigeria or wherever. And they say, yes, we need this done. Do it right away. $150,000 out the window. Happens again, another week later, the money goes again, third time usually. They go into the CEO and say, why are we wiring all this money to some random bank in Taiwan? And the CEO looks at him like that person has 3 eyes and says, what are you talking about? And they discover that they've been had. So remember, that was a free tool. And then the other example I want to cite is we're probably all familiar with the attacks that have occurred over the last 2 years where bank websites were attacked allegedly by Iranian sympathizers that slowed down internet banking. And it was a nuisance more than anything else, but there were days, sometimes multiple days where bank websites were not available for use because of what they call distributed denial of service attacks, basically overloading the website. And it sounds very sophisticated. Do you know how much that cost? I'm sorry for being the law professor rhetorical question here, but so I'll answer it myself. $2 an hour. You go hire somebody anywhere in the world for $2 an hour, 4-hour minimum, they will conduct a distributed denial of service attack against your website. Let me tell you, I can't get my 6-year-old to clean up her room for $2 an hour, but I can take down PNC's website. It's pretty scary.
Larry, what's that, the thing that's happening right now,
Crypto locker, yeah.
Has anybody heard of crypto
I
locker?
just got an email on that.
Did you really?
Yeah.
If you click on a link, and it can be like it says FedEx or UPS or anything else, you click on that, it is so sophisticated, they will lock you out of everything you have, and you have so many hours to pay $300 to get the key to unlock it, and you cannot get it. But what happens, people report it to the FBI or somebody, they'll go in and lock it, but once they've taken down the server, you will never get your data back again.
Mhm.
So if you see, and I don't even know where it's coming from, do we even know where that's coming from?
And it's coming from multiple directions at this point.
It is?
Yeah.
It is?
But don't pay it.
But don't pay it? But they do give you your key back, but don't pay it?
No, they don't give you your feedback either.
Oh, they don't even give it back to you?
Don't pay it.
Don't pay it?
It's a scam.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I mean, but you can't get your,
Okay, send me $50.
well, no, you work on my computer, yeah. You're the one who cried. Yeah, but that's scary. I mean, that is a brilliant, that's vicious, it's threatening, and why do people do that? Money, I guess, money.
Money.
That's just, so who's behind that? Is it just a bunch of guys, or is it government behind stuff like that?
It's,
I'll tell you. This goes more on a criminal side, okay? Because Luke talked about, you have governmental spying, if you will. You have industrial spying, if you will. And then you have your freelancers. You have your guys who are going out there. If you want to call them spy, you can call them spy, whatever. But they're actually doing attacks on your computer, whatever. And all they're after is money. You have whether it's your Russian mob, your Ukrainian mob, or Nigerian, or whatever. And they're after the money. It's another scam. Like they do the lock thing, and they want $300 or whatever. Don't pay it. Don't just ignore it if you want, and have somebody who knows what they're doing clean your stuff up or whatever. But I actually wanted to go back to a young lady. I think she left already. Niet Parimante Paruski. Yeah, she's doing her laptop.
I think her code's still here, she maybe stepped out.
One of the things I wanted to bring up is the spy by proxy. Okay, it's not always the CEO they're looking after. It's not always the top guy that they're after or anything else like that. They're always after the ancillary folks. They may be looking at the executive assistant or the secretary or somebody else that travels. Really, that's the Achilles heel, and that's what they're going after, because the CEO, they're usually more guarded, or they're more aware or something else like that. But they're looking for that Achilles heel as far as gathering information, whether it's a competitive edge or whether it's some sort of technology advantage that they want or anything else like that. So that's a huge vulnerability to be aware of. And the other one is Luke was talking about Japan. Okay, don't forget, you've got to go somewhere to get to somewhere else where you're going. There's no saying if you travel enough in Europe and Asia, the whole world goes through Frankfurt, right? Okay, it's that transit point, because you're vulnerable pretty much from being in your house or traveling anywhere else. And the folks know where you're traveling, so they're targeting you wherever. Don't just have that situational awareness when you're in country, when you're in your host station, when you're in your hotel or whatever else it is. It's also in a transit. I just wanted to bring one small little thing of technology, okay? So everybody's got one of these things, if I can find mine real quick, right? Right, BlackBerry phone, whatever, right? When you travel, do you charge it at the airport? Do you charge it? Right? Guess what you just did? Whether it's a government or whether it's a privateer, if you will, they can not, it's not always government, not always somebody else, like Luke was saying about the hotel room, stuff like that. It works both ways. You can have your privateer out there doing the same thing. Well, you just put in that charger, somebody can pretty much own your phone. That's it. So always be aware. Bring your own charger, charge it to your own wall, stuff like that. If you're gonna travel with a phone, if you're gonna do things like that, be aware of that. Be aware of all those sensitivities, and be aware that you're a target always. It's not just when you're in country or when you're meeting across somebody. And they're always looking for the competitive edge. Yes?
You've been talking a lot about cyber attacks and stuff like that. What is your assessment of if or when a cyber Pearl Harbor will happen?
That's a great question. So when will we possibly have a cyber Pearl Harbor?
The question is who would it come from and why would they do it? That's really what you have to look at. Because it's a double-edged sword. It's really a double-edged sword, because when you're looking at somebody else doing it, it's like, and not to do anything about the Chinese or whatever, because the Chinese own a lot of our bonds, own a lot of our currency, a lot of our debt. So everybody says, oh, how can you let the Chinese do that? They can flood the market. They would never cut off their own head. They would never short a bond or short something that's American, because they're hurting their own purposes. So yes, there's a vulnerability, and it can come from a myriad of different countries, entities, or just somebody who's got a, like Snowden for somebody, and wants to go ahead and do it, like a privateer or somebody like that, just to prove to somebody else, Mr. Eagle, $1 million, right? They're going to go out there and they're going to do something because they can, and they're going to try and sell that technology or that ability to somebody else.
Well, I want to ask you each, what makes you guys lose sleep at night? I mean, just because nobody's out to get you doesn't mean you have a reason not to be paranoid. I mean, really, what is, I don't even know if I really want to know what's keeping you up at night. I might have insomnia after this, but what's keeping you guys up at night based on what you know?
People's short-term memory. No matter what you go through, history repeats itself, right? There's an old saying that says, if those who don't learn by history are bound and determined to make the same mistakes over and over again. The further we get away from the situation, the more desensitized we become to it, the more vulnerable we become to ourselves. All this, the stuff about Google, I mean, Google's the biggest collector of data out there. You think that some of the agencies are collecting data. They're profiling you. They're looking at every click, every purchase that you do, everything else like that out there. So if you want to lose any sleep, lose sleep about how vulnerable you are as an individual. I don't lose any sleep. But lose sleep about how vulnerable you are, and be aware. I mean, if you want to sleep like a baby, just be aware of what the vulnerabilities are and make sure you take care of them. Yes, sir. Who for?
Do you think that as a businessman, how would you advise I operate comfortably in this threat environment?
You want me to do that one, right?
So as a businessman, how do you operate comfortably in this threat environment?
Well, I'll tell you from being a business owner myself, I mean, we operate 80% of our businesses that we do day to day are outside of the United States. We're always on an airplane. We just came back from the Middle East just last week. We have Middle East clients in town right now. What we need to do is we just separate out or compartmentalize, just as you would in the government, your different entities. So for example, if I am traveling to the Middle East, I have a special phone just for the Middle East that I take. I have a special computer that I take just to the Middle East. I have a way that I communicate back to my office, to my family in a certain way. I know that when I travel, I do not use a business lounge when I'm traveling through Frankfurt or any of these other lounges in Dubai. I don't get the free Wi-Fi because I know as soon as I do, someone's going to connect to that. I never leave my electronics alone, even for 5 minutes. They have a saying in the government, if you are separated from your electronics, meaning your cell phone, your laptop, for 5 minutes, it has been compromised. And I've seen the demo, and people say, oh, I put my cell phone and my computer into my hotel safe, and then I go down to breakfast. Well, let me tell you, it only takes a couple minutes to go in. I was in Bangkok one time. I went into the room, safe was locked, called down, I said, hey, somebody locked my safe. Kid came up, goes 000 pound, and the door pops open. And I say to the little bellboy, I'm like, what was that? And he goes, oh, tourists are always locking the safe. It's a master code. So, I mean, if the bellboy, the bellhop knows this, obviously the intelligence service knows it. And we do a demonstration in our training where we'll, for businessmen, we'll have a safe, we'll crack the safe, and we'll run a stopwatch while we do it, break out the computer, we'll plug in a Logitech or one of the hardware, downloading software, and we'll suck everything off that guy's computer, even if it's password protected, cell phones, password protected. We'll suck it all down, put it back in the thing, stop the stopwatch, and under a course of a few minutes, we've taken everything out of a guy's, cell phone or anything like that. So essentially, travel with different items. The older stuff is better. When I travel to, let's say, India or Russia or China, I'm taking the old, the cheap Razor phones, the flip phones, because those are a lot harder to hack or get into or listen in on than, say, today's smartphone. So there's a lot of little things you can do, but as a businessman, you've got to, obviously you got to take your electronics with you. I mean, it's business, you have to do it. But just never separate yourself. I would say that's the main rule when you're overseas.
So Brian, what keeps you up at night?
I've mentioned my daughter several times, so they like to break into our bedroom like they were the freaking DEA SWAT team at 2 in the morning, complete with screaming and telling us to hands up and get out of the bed. But, I've learned so much over the past 5 years or so. I'm really focusing on cybersecurity and espionage, et cetera, that to a certain degree, maybe it's the medicine, it just kind of rolls off my back at this point. And I've learned that there's a difference between risk mitigation and risk elimination. And I've come to understand that there's no such thing as risk elimination when it comes to espionage or theft of information, et cetera. So I think I have a better understanding of the risk, and which is a way of saying I'm not so concerned about it anymore. But if anything does concern me, it's the lack of awareness on our end, on the capabilities and the seriousness of our enemies than anything else. I mean, look, if foreign government X or organized crime group X or terrorist group X can break into the NSA or the DOD or the FBI or whatever, and they do, there's no reason for me to think that I can do something that will stop them. If they want to get you, they're going to get you. It's like I was talking to a guy who owned a series of casinos in Mexico. And I said, so what's that like? He goes, once you accept that the Mexican cartels can kill you at any given moment, it's not that bad. So it's like you actually make a decent amount of money. You just leave them alone. But these things are going to happen. And what concerns me is that people don't take the problem seriously enough. And so that's the sort of thing, and that's part of my job, is to talk to CEOs and general counsels and CFOs and also members of Congress, et cetera, to get them to understand that, there are going to be breaches, there are going to be hacks, there are going to be thefts of information, et cetera. And it's as much about how you respond as it is about what you do to prevent it. So, I like to say there's sort of 3 tiers of threats. There's nation state, there's organized crime, and then there's the kid drinking Mountain Dew in his basement playing Xbox. Nation states, forget it. They're going to be able to break into you basically whenever they want. Your job is to try and catch it as quickly as possible and put a stop to it, or call somebody who can stop it. Organized crime, you should be able, with the right investments, to stop most of those attacks and then catch the remainder fairly quickly. The kids, you should be able to stop pretty much all of those. And so it's all about sort of triage when it comes to risk at the end of the day. And I don't think enough people appreciate that as of yet. We still go into companies that are Fortune 50 plus, and they say, well, what can we do to stop cyber attacks? And it's like, why are you asking me that question? There's nothing you can do about that. And some people don't like to hear that answer, but the reality is you just can't stop it at a certain point. It's so pervasive and it's so easy to do. One other thing I wanted to address was the comment about Cyber Pearl Harbor. I'm a bit of a military buff nerd. My frustrated goal in life, well, one of them was I wanted to go to the Naval Academy, and because of poor eyesight, I wasn't able to go. But I've always enjoyed reading about naval history, and in particular about World War II. And when people talk about a cyber Pearl Harbor, I think there's this one massive attack that's going to knock America off kilter, and wake us up to the threat and cause us to all sorts of destruction and get engaged in this significant conflict. Well, I personally don't like the notion of calling it a cyber Pearl Harbor. I know why people do it, and I know why the government agencies do it. And leaders like General Alexander or Secretary Napolitano and people like that is to try and dramatize the threat. Ironically, General Alexander, through his actions at NSA, has done more to promote security
than anything the Chinese or the Russians have done. Google and Yahoo locking down their cloud servers as a result of NSA efforts. But be that as it may, being a bit of a history buff, you look at what happened at Pearl Harbor, it wasn't, a lot of people were killed. And don't get me wrong, a lot of great Americans lost their lives. It was a terrible day in American history. But strategically, it wasn't that bad at the end of the day. We lost a bunch of battleships. Those battleships were old, and in all likelihood, if they had sortied out of Pearl Harbor, they would have been sunk in deep water and would have been even worse. A lot of planes were blown up. These were old planes that were going to get shot down immediately by the Japanese anyways. The Japanese didn't bomb the oil storage facilities. They didn't bomb the repair facilities. They didn't get the aircraft carriers because the aircraft carriers weren't there that day. They didn't do anything to the industrial base of the United States. So tactically, it was a victory for Japan, but strategically, it wasn't really that important. So when we're talking about a cyber Pearl Harbor, you know, people look at it as something that's really going to disrupt the fabric of America. And I don't like that notion because it diverts our attention from the fact that we're already suffering dramatically from espionage and cyber attacks. And I think the better analogy is the cyber undersea warfare, the U-boat war, where it's death by 1,000 cuts. And we're suffering that at this point through the loss of intellectual property, through the loss of business secrets, through the loss and compromise of our defense industrial base. One of my clients, FireEye, just came out with a report where they showed Chinese drones that had leapt ahead several generations through cyber espionage, going after the small companies, not the Boeings and the General Atomics of the world, but they managed to get the pieces of information they needed from a bunch of small companies, pieced it all together, and leapt ahead 3-4 generations. The Defense Science Board put out a report last spring that the Washington Post got its hands on. Basically, every next generation American weapon system has been thoroughly compromised by the Chinese government. That's really scary to me. And we need to be focusing on that, not if somebody's going to hack in and turn off the lights in New York City for 5 days.
So if no one can keep the Chinese out, what's the plan of defense?
You do the best you can. I mean, it's about, again, stopping the attacks you should be able to stop, and then finding the ones once they've occurred, trying to mitigate them as quickly as possible, but understanding at the end of the day it's going to happen. It's sort of like the retail term shrinkage, where they're insider theft, and you just sort of assume a couple % of your inventory is going to be stolen by employees, and you try to manage that as much as possible. To the same extent for electronic espionage, that's going to happen. And it's about controlling the 95 to 98% that you can, and for that remaining 2%, stopping it as soon as you can.
You know, one of the things too, I think because my husband's a consultant for mostly medical practices, but companies, and one of the biggest threats is their employees who will click the link that nobody should click, but it's not their computer, and before you know it, everything's brought down. Okay, we'll go back here. Yep. Right.
Me? Fantastic. I'm gonna ask the weirdest question. We're talking about right now. Let's fast forward to the future. We are creating such advanced algorithms, I'm sure, big data, all this stuff. Artificial intelligence, are we hedging against the, I mean, come on, Terminator 2, we all saw it. You know, what is the probability of that not happening, of us not creating artificial intelligence and that saying, hey, why am I listening to these guys? And then using its access to this information to then, I mean, that's a major threat. Have we thought about that yet?
What's the question?
Terminator 2? We're looking at human beings as the threat. Are we considering the possibility that the technology that we're creating could become a threat one day?
So will our own technology that we're inventing outsmart us, take over us?
Yeah.
Why not, eventually?
Yeah. So let me, okay, that's a good question. I don't think we've all got the answer to that. But let me ask you this. I want you to say the 3 things you want to make sure this audience walks out and knows, either to do or to believe or change or do. I want from each 3 of you.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. Number 1, naivete. Don't be so naive that you are not a target. That's the number 1 thing. The number 2 thing, always assume, and I know what we say about assuming, when you assume you make an ass of you and me, but always assume that when you're overseas, you are under some type of surveillance, whether it be physical or electronic. And a lot of you probably can't believe that you've ever been under surveillance by a surveillance team. And it does happen, even when it all starts at the airport. So when you are traveling, assume you're under surveillance. And number three, the last thing, $300 billion. That's how much money the United States loses every year. John Huntsman, the former ambassador to China, he ran for president. He was put on the Commission for Intellectual Property Theft. And it came out $300 billion is how much money the United States loses every year. And keep in mind, not all of that's reported. First quarter of last year, American businesses reported $12 billion lost or stolen intellectual property. Now, that's what's reported. Imagine if you work for a business. Would you actually report if someone stole your R&D plans? What do you think that would do to your shareholder confidence? It would completely erode it. So a lot of this stuff is happening, and it never gets reported. So assume you're under surveillance. Don't be naive. And no, it's a big number out there.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I used to run an internet service provider company. You have to realize that that's the network. I mean, we're out there. And we were hacked and brought down. And I mean, I have really brilliant guys working for me. We could get into the data center. And all my colleagues would never have done this, but I reported it to the FBI. Because I thought if we don't begin to track where this is, and your clients don't want to hear that you have been intruded upon. But I felt that if we don't start becoming more vocal about this and tracking back, and actually I thought it had maybe come from Russia or China, it was Spain. It was a guy in Spain that did it and was holding our accounts hostage. We worked around it. But it's really important that that's one less person, you know, who's at least been found and is going to possibly be able to do that. So, okay. And Lottie, what do you think the three things?
I don't know if I can count that high.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. I want to go back a few steps. We talked about comfort and stuff like that. Here's the thing, folks, is don't be paranoid when you travel and do things. Just be cautious. Be aware of your surroundings. Know that you might be vulnerable. A person of interest, or whatever you want to call it, or whatever. But don't be paranoid. Enjoy yourself when you travel. Be aware of everything else. Be safe. But here's the thing: is you are going to be, if you're at a certain level, or even if you're an assistant or something like that, you are going to be surveilled by another government or whatever. But here's the thing: is don't antagonize them. I think Luke might have said that before. Don't antagonize them.
Don't go looking and everything and.
Not just that. Not just that. Don't. I mean, I know. You know, this guy's following me, so I'm going to pretend like I'm dropping something. I mean, number one, the guy's just doing his job. Number two, you don't know how often that other service has actually saved somebody from going the wrong way somewhere. Kind of stopped them and said, "Hey, go that way." Okay, because they're actually there. Put it to you this way: if you get kidnapped by a privateer or something like that, or something else happens, that intelligence officer's going to get in trouble. Okay, so they're there to follow you, to learn from you, everything else like that. But don't go sit there like, number one, the camera's in the TV, by the way, all the time. So not in a fire extinguisher. But when you travel and stuff like that, and you're going to be surveilled, these guys are just doing their job. Just be aware that they're there. When you come back, tell us, report us, and say, hey, listen, I went to XYZ country and stuff like that. And there are some countries that are very, very good at what they do. You never know they're there. They're not always bumper lucking you, as we call it. You're not always going to be aware of that. But always, when you come back and either contact the FBI or whatever. We're usually, if we know you're being targeted or whatever, a lot of times we'll reach out to you and we'll say, hey, do you want to tell us how was your trip or anything else like that? I know that my brothers across the river do the same thing. But just be aware of that. And also, when you work, depending on the level that you're at, all the folks around you, that spiderweb thing, okay, talk with the folks that you're traveling with and all that. Either travel in a pack, whatever, or make them aware as well. And say, hey, Bob, where are you going tonight? Oh, I don't know. I think I'm just going to get a cab and tell them to take me somewhere. Right? You'd be surprised. Right? It happens. So, yes, ma'am. Am I being yanked? Yes, ma'am.
If this is happening to us when we're traveling in other countries, what are we doing when foreign people are coming into the country?
I'm not touching that one.
Okay. I think Brian can maybe answer that. And so Brian, what are your three things, and what do we do when
With respect to what we're doing to people travel into the United States, we are a nation of laws and a strong constitution, despite what MSNBC might tell you. So the law enforcement community is one that I have great respect for, and there are Article 3 courts, and there are very strong rules and procedures that are in place that preclude us from conducting surveillance and operations that are outside the limitations that have been constitutionally set forth. Now, having said that, remember the president said I could launch a missile from a drone against any American citizen if I think they're an imminent threat. So it's all about interpretation. But long story short, we are a nation of laws. We're a nation of lawmakers, and we have very, very careful policies and lots of people who do not take actions that other countries would feel free to do. With respect to the three things that I want you to walk away with, number one, failure isn't an option, failure is a certainty. You will be the successful victim of espionage or a cyber attack at some point. You probably have already been the successful victim of espionage or a cyber attack. You have to understand that. You have to accept that. You also have to understand it's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes you just can't help it. Again, if the NSA, the CIA, the Defense Department are successfully being penetrated, there is no reason to believe that you as a business person in your business, despite all the money you put in your IT department, are going to stop every attack. If you owned an oil refinery and the Chinese or the Soviets bombed it, it wasn't your responsibility to shoot down those bombers. It's the government's responsibility to do that. It is your responsibility to put out the fire as quickly as you can, but it isn't your responsibility to repel a state-level attack. So just understand that this is going to happen at some time and you have to plan for it. The second thing is that for the business people, the business owners in the room, use business sense in addition to common sense when you're trying to confront this threat. And by that, I mean, I'm a lawyer, deal with contracts, you have draw up sales agreements, you draw up vendor agreements, you negotiate terms and conditions, representations, certifications, warranties, etc. every day in your business dealings. There are ways to mitigate your risk in contract and through other mechanisms so that you are not caught flat-footed and so you don't bear sole responsibility when something happens. It's like anything else. If you're going to negotiate a lease on a building, you go through who's responsible for common area maintenance. You go through who's responsible for tenant security, who's responsible for HVAC. Espionage, cybersecurity, it's the same thing. Negotiated in your contract. Define clearly up front who's responsible for what. And why do you want to do that? Because when something happens, you can point to the document and say to the judge, I'm not responsible, she's responsible. She should be paying me for the breach, not the other way around versus going back and forth and having a argument of witnesses. That's not what you want to have happen. So use business common sense. The last thing I want to say is that there are some out there who talk about cyber offense on the private side. Hacking back, tracing who's conducting the attack and going after them. I'll use an anecdote to illustrate this. Dickstein Shapiro, Sidney Dickstein, and the late great David Shapiro. David I. Shapiro was a terrific lawyer and one of the most interesting personalities in the world. And by that, even though this is on videotape, I'll say it, he was a very difficult personality. And he was one who sort of thought, it's my law firm, I can do what I want. So David I. Shapiro was notorious for going into the kitchen, opening up the fridge, and eating whatever food was in the fridge, regardless of whose name was on the lunch bag. He just felt, hey, it's in there, free food, it's a free-for-all, I'm gonna go in and take it. So one day, David goes into the kitchen, he opens up the fridge and he looks around, and being a good Jewish boy from the Upper West or Lower East Side of Manhattan, he sees a plate of chopped liver and says, damn, that looks really good.
So he grabs the chopped liver and he wolfs it down in his office. Little did David realize that that chopped liver had been sitting in the fridge for 6 months. 15 minutes later, the paramedics were in his office pumping his stomach, much to the delight of many of the employees. The moral of the story is be careful whose lunch you try to eat. If you're going to go on the cyber offense, and some of you may be tempted to do that, say, I'm constantly under attack, let's strike back, odds are you're poking a bear with a stick, sometimes literally the Russian bear, or maybe it's the Chinese tiger. Don't draw the attention of the People's Liberation Army by hacking back at them, because your life will get significantly worse. Or possibly even worse, you just blew up some grandmother's computer that her grandsons bought for her, and she didn't realize was being used remotely to conduct attacks, and now you're responsible for blowing up Grandma Robin's computer. So don't be tempted by these folks who say counter cyber attacks is a good thing. I don't think it is.
Then let me ask you this, because we've invited you because you're each professionals. How can you help anybody in the audience that we may not know what their needs are, but tell us what your expertise is so that anybody who discreetly needs to pull you aside at some point or reach out to you would know what you specialize in and how you may be able to help them.
Well, number one, you can tell I'm a frustrated comedy writer. So if anybody needs any jokes for bar mitzvahs or for weddings and rehearsal dinners, etc. Excuse me. I get this question from my chairman, by the way, a lot too. What the hell do you do all day? But what we do at my law firm with respect to data security and physical security, et cetera, is that we work with companies to help them understand what exactly their obligations are, whether statutory, regulatory, or by policy. And in addition, we work with them to help them put themselves in a position to argue post-event that you took all reasonable steps necessary to protect yourself, and therefore you shouldn't have liability. In other words, we weren't negligent. In fact, we did everything we should. We didn't do everything we could have done, but we did everything we should have done, and those are two different things. And that stems in part because in the post-9/11 world, basically the standard of care when it comes to security is if that you knew or you should have been aware of a threat, you have to take reasonable mitigation measures. And especially when it comes to industrial or economic espionage or cyber espionage, however you want to coin the phrase, all of you know or should be aware of the threat. And so now you have to take reasonable measures. What is reasonable? That's the problem we face as lawyers and you face as business people. What is reasonable? And what we do is we come in and we work with you to help determine what exactly is reasonable. And then we help you document that to show that you were taking appropriate measures, and thus, when something bad happens, you have a record available to you that helps mitigate or eliminate the possibility of litigation or dramatically shortens it. And then there are some statutory programs we work with as well that actually, by federal law, either limit or eliminate your liability following a cyber attack or a terrorist event. The other thing that we do, and I do personally, is government affairs, which is a fancy way for saying lobbying, which is another fancy way of saying I'm a lawyer and a lobbyist and I'm on Fox News, so about 80% of the people in the United States think I'm what's wrong with America. But we go before Congress, we go before the Defense Department, we go before the Department of Homeland Security, all sorts of federal agencies to help impact policy decisions, sometimes procurement decisions, to the benefit of our client. And that could be as sophisticated and nuanced as talking about the benefits of detonation chambers with respect to defeating and detecting zero-day or advanced persistent threats.
See, they don't want me to talk anymore.
Yeah, I didn't do anything, I swear.
Okay. All right. The other thing we do is we go and say, hey, you know that company you're going to buy computers from? They're actually Chinese, and then nobody buys them. So, but that's what I do as a lawyer and a lobbyist, and those are the kinds of services that we offer. Basically any business, is to help them understand the risks, help them plan to mitigate those risks, kind of like insurance but not insurance, and then advocate for policy positions that are beneficial to you as well as to the nation.
Thank you, and then make sure you speak up so we can get
Yep.
that. So
Sure.
what do you do to help companies? I just want to make sure everybody knows what these guys did, so when you leave and go, wait, I should have asked them if they can help me, and whatever that thing is you're working on. You have this.
At our company, SMI, what we do is we help American business, also business from other countries, if they're relocating overseas to a new part of the world that they may not be familiar with. They may be doing a merger or an acquisition in that country. They're not familiar with the espionage threats that may be on the ground. Are we working again? We'll go in and perform a special type of due diligence for them. The other thing, if a client of ours has had some kind of security breach that may be embarrassing, they don't want to take to other people, they may call us and we come in and try to help them solve their problems there. And then the traditional physical security as well, in terms of doing assessments, vulnerability assessments, target analysis, providing emergency response planning, doing tabletop exercises, any kind of contingency planning that a company may experience, but majority of the time in more harsh environments. Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, places down there.
Okay, how about a curveball? So after 22 years in the FBI, I retired, and I became an Allstate agent. So I have an insurance agency, so I want to be your protection partner. So I went from being a special agent to an Allstate agent, because I just wanted to be an agent. Okay? But I do have a small interest in a, if you want to call it a security risk management business. And one of the things that we do is we do soft security. Okay, so it's not shoulder to shoulder.
I want to protect you or anything else like that. So if you want to be aware of whether or not you're a target when you travel, let us know. We'll actually do a soft surveillance. We'll say, yeah, you're being tagged, you're not being tagged. Also, if you're concerned for your safety or safety of your gear, your equipment, whatever, we can help you with the tracking of all that and the tracking of you. We won't be obvious. We'll try and be as more discreet as we can as the other service might be working with whoever else the private side is working against you. So that is the other side of me, the other side of what I do. Also, you got to remember, I took an oath to protect the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So consider me a friend as an American. If you ever have any questions, concern, want to know how do I address this, please call me. Because if I can't do it, I'll get a hold of Luke or get a hold of somebody and we'll take care of it for you. Because it's really a community of friends. We're all in this really to protect each other and really to protect our interests in America, if you will, against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And to go back to what Pat said, when you're here in the United States, it's not going to necessarily be the FBI that's tapping you or tracking you. It's going to be the other foreign services. Because when you're here, you feel safe. And what do? Let your guard down. So that's when they look for your vulnerabilities and they follow you and they tap you and do everything else. So it's not always us.
Well, there's something else you could do, which you advised me on, is that you need to know what insurance levels you need to have in your business for these kinds of things, which is one of the things that I never thought about, that there's levels of insurance you could get when you were working in these areas internationally, or security, those kinds of things.
Or internal theft, if you will, and stuff like that. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. It has nothing to do with these things, but sort of. The Secret Service agent that went to the Hay Adams.
Yes, ma'am.
How did he do that? And here you're so knowledgeable. And clearly, he's been trained and knowledgeable. Was he set up? Or
What are we talking
He's
about?
a man that
missing
goes out drinking and finds a very attractive young lady who invites him back to the hotel room.
But you're at the Hay Adams across from the White House.
Right.
You have to
Well,
be
his
an idiot.
his
You have to
choice
be an
in
idiot.
judgment,
Huh?
you're calling in question his choice in judgment. Really, and that's what really you should be concerned with. And it's just,
But do you think there's anything else behind it, is what I'm saying? Do you think
I'll-
it's more than that?
Here's the thing, is I'm cynical. If there was something else behind it, we wouldn't know about it. We wouldn't know about it. The person would not have gone public. Nobody would have known about it. He would have been worked. In this case, he's not being worked. That's my assessment.
What's going
He's
to
just
happen?
I was just curious if
a
there was
horny guy,
anything more
sorry.
going on.
What's going to happen with Edward Snowden? What do you think the outcome's that going to be?
I think he and Roman Polanski will be sharing an apartment.
Okay, we had a question here, and then I'll go back to you. You had a question earlier, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to touch on something because this is for the average citizen, not.
And this is Luke's wife, by the way.
Yes,
Here
it
she
has
is,
nothing
working.
to do with that.
Here we go.
He goes with his beautiful wife around the world, so you don't draw
Not
attention
to
to
the
yourself.
100-some countries, not really. In America, I guess the mentality is different from Europeans' mentality, or even other regions of the world, in terms of privacy and the sharing of information. So you mentioned Google and other companies, even Amazon, when you do your purchases online and everything like that. Americans are used to and comfortable with businesses sharing the information for ad purposes, for commercial purposes, not so much the government doing that. Whereas in other regions of the world, people have a sense that the government is there also to protect them in terms of public safety and all that. So it's okay to some extent, to some level, if the government intrudes upon their lives. So I guess the result of that is people here don't have, as Brian was mentioning, professor, you were my professor, by the way, with just going online, surfing the internet, making purchases, and their information is being collected, and they are okay with that. And they only get alarmed when it's government, their own government or foreign government. So how, in your respective functions, do you educate your clients, or how important it is to educate your clients? Because I don't think the awareness in that regard is heightened as it is in terms of espionage to intellectual property and all that.
You raise a very interesting point, which is the whole issue of data privacy. It is really interesting. I mean, you go to the UK and they've got the Ring of Steel, which cameras and license plate readers, and you basically can't go anywhere in the UK without having your picture taken by a government-owned closed-circuit television camera. However, the UK and the European Union writ large have some of the strongest data privacy laws for consumers in the world. I mean, you basically, any bit of information you put out there is subject to strict privacy rules with respect to what businesses can do with that information. And it's a real legal minefield for a lot of companies, because we think we have fairly strong data privacy requirements in the United States. It's absolutely nothing compared to what the European Union has. So it's the kind of thing that you as a business owner tend to have to be concerned about and need good counsel. And frankly, for us, not me, I'm not a data privacy lawyer, although I know of a few good folks. You really need to be mindful of that, and you need to be careful of that. It is an interesting dichotomy at the end of the day. And it's also an interesting dichotomy, too, because Americans really are wonderful about putting everything about their lives on the internet and on reality television, but then getting offended when people take advantage of that. Some people get their news from the Washington Post, some people get it from the Daily Show. I get mine from the Onion. I don't know if I had that. And the Onion is so spot on sometimes. They had this article about 6 months ago which said every potential presidential candidate in the year 2040 rendered unelectable due to Facebook. And they showed all these, these kids who are like, he's the, student body president at Duke, he's the president of Habitat for Humanity, but he also posted a picture of himself smoking out of an 8-foot bong he called the Gorilla Monster. It's like, it's that kind of, we love throwing information out there, but we're offended when somebody takes advantage of it. And let me tell you, I've heard some stories, and I won't elaborate on it, but some of the things the government does with Twitter and Facebook, particularly overseas, you'd be shocked at what they do as part of intelligence gathering operations. But they do it, and people are out there, and they all of a sudden, somebody tweets you, you'll tweet it back, whatever, you'll click on the link, and next thing you know, you've been compromised. But you do that as an American citizen in the United States, people get very offended. There's nothing worse than when I'm shopping for something for my wife, and I'm looking for some dress or something from Nordstrom, and then somebody walks into my office and I'm on a different page, and then all of a sudden there's all these dress or Victoria's Secret ads all over, flashing in the corner, and they're looking at me like, what's going on? I'm like, well, shopping for my wife. But in Europe,
But they're
that's very
still
different.
okay with sharing it all on Facebook. I just bought this for my
Yeah.
wife, and this is the price and
Yeah,
everything.
well, we're okay, or we
Dichotomy,
can't figure out how to
yeah.
stop it.
So we just want to trust that everybody's going to be fair with our information. We have one last question, and then we'll close up. And you can say goodbye, Pat, because you're the chairman of the board. I have to be nice to you, so you'll close
I
this
feel
up.
bad. Don't make me go over the chairman of the board. Okay, quick question. This is mainly for Lottie, but Brian and Luke, I appreciate your input as well. I work I was a Moscow girl that asked the question, but I work now for Mass Mutual. It's a Fortune 100 company, financial services, and you work for Allstate as well. You work a lot with individuals who have, Fortune 500 plus companies. how concerned should Americans be? I mean, if you are working with a financial services company or a strictly American company that's not necessarily international or don't work very much in any international environment, how concerned should they be about being hacked? Especially in terms of your insurance, your investments, should they be considerably concerned about being hacked?
I mean, I think we talked earlier, and I don't want to bother with Mike, but I think we talked earlier about some of the banks being hacked.
Yeah, you were talking, yeah.
And here's the thing is people are going to try and get into you constantly, whether it's a government or whether it's, like I said before, I call privateers, whether it's somebody trying to get information, they either sell it or use it themselves. It's going to happen. The only thing you can do is be as cautious as you can. You want to call me a security nerd, but, when you walk away from your computer, lock it, especially if you're in the financial services. Because here's the thing, is the internal vulnerability is probably as dangerous as the external. Because you can have somebody in your office who's behind their bills, who's whatever, and somebody's targeted that person to get to you at a real low level. And that's what you have to be aware of, is everything around you. So just be cognizant of that, like I said before, not necessarily be paranoid, but be aware. Be aware of your surroundings.
So even the individual life insurance policyholder, individual auto insurance policyholder should be concerned, is what you're saying.
Let me tell you something, the financial industries have triple encryption, so it's really hard, trust me, I try to get in there. It's really hard to hack in, and I'm kidding, by the way, that is on story. But it's really hard, so I'm telling you, the majority of your financial institutions out there have fantastic security. Super, super fantastic security. When you're talking about a more regional bank that we gave the example of before, that may not always be the case. But when you're looking at your Mass Mutual, okay, I used to work for Sears and Lehman Brothers. When you look at your Mass Mutual company, stuff like that, their encryption, they use triple encryption. It's really hard to crack in there. And the vulnerability, again, in my opinion, it comes more from inside. Okay, it's a client walking through your office. Because what they can do is throw a thumb drive in your computer. Okay, because they see an empty office. They go use the bathroom, they come back, they take it out, you're done, your history. They own everything you have in there. Okay, so those are the things to be aware of. And not be paranoid, but be aware of it and talk to people when you say, hey, Charlie, I just found this, here's what I learned. Don't insult their intelligence or anything, here's what I learned, and take it like that. Does that make sense? To answer you?
Just like you lock your doors at your house, you want to make sure you're taking the same precautions at your computer. Okay?
I booby trap my doors.
Yeah, you stand up and number one, just let everybody know who you are.
One
and say
quick
what-
question. I'm Pat Messini, member and chair of the board here at Tower Club. My question is dual for Lottie and for Brian. When we negotiate leases, I'm in commercial real estate, and we negotiate operating expenses, HVAC, tenant security, but we didn't negotiate prior to 9/11 the destruction and the terrorism and what happened, the ramifications that had on insurance. Should we now be looking to the future on the insurance side of the contract?
Well, most of your insurance now has that.
Does your business interruption?
Correct.
If my company goes under because of a cyber attack, is it covered by business interruption insurance?
It should be. You got to read your policy, and you got to make sure specifically that you ask for that. It's kind of like making sure, hey, I've got fire insurance. If that's a vulnerability, that's one thing you want to be able to
But is
do.
that people thinking about that when they were asking for a business insurance? Is that normal?
If you have somebody who knows what they're doing, you're going to say, hey, listen, by the way, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this kind of coverage? Have you thought about identity theft for your business, for your employees, things of that nature, for your accounts? And you can get identity theft insurance for not only for yourself, but for your businesses as well. And just about every insurance policy now has an act of terrorism as far as business interruption and continuity of business and stuff like that. So those are all things that you have to make sure that you have.
Cybersecurity,
Yes, ma'am.
So terrorism insurance is generally available through a program known as the Terrorism Reinsurance Act, and then the Terrorism Reinsurance Program Act of 2007. Stupid congressional titles. That's actually set to expire a year from now, and so Congress is negotiating right now, or at least thinking about negotiating, whether that program will be renewed. And basically what it does is it says that the government will backstop terrorism insurance programs. It will reinsure the insurers in the event of an act of terrorism, and there's a threshold that has to be met, and the premium contributions that have to be met, et cetera. It was set up because post 9/11, a lot of carriers were shying away from writing terrorism insurance because they couldn't quantify the risk. The actuarial analysis was functionally impossible. But as Lottie was saying, yeah, you can buy it, you have to look for it. but you need to be careful. You need to have either your broker or your insurance lawyer. And full disclosure, our firm has 60 insurance coverage lawyers, and so which is why I know anything about this, because I certainly wouldn't know otherwise. But you have to look at those policies, and when you're negotiating your lease, you want to have your insurance coverage counsel take a look at that too. And with respect to cyber, the fastest growing market, I think, at this point in the insurance industry is in cyber policies. There are so many companies coming out with cyber policies right now. It could be covered, it could well be covered under legacy policies like your crime policy, your commercial general liability policy, maybe your excess, et cetera. But carriers in the past couple of years have gotten better about writing that out and directing people towards these specialty policies. And there are so many forms out there, insurance forms, that it's questionable what you're buying and how far it's going to go. And it's not that there's bad products out there, and certainly your agent is going to do the best job possible in order to make sure you have the best coverage possible, but you need to consult with them. You cannot read it on your own and make a decision about whether this is good or not. You need to work with your agent, you need to work with your broker, and if necessary, you need to work with counsel to make sure that this policy is worth the paper it's written on.
And a lot of it has to do with openness and trust. Tell them what kind of business you are, what kind of vulnerabilities you perceive, and inform and educate. Be open about what it is that you might be concerned with to make sure that you have the right match. Okay, because you may have something you may be aware of, and all of a sudden that clicks something off in your head and say, oh, by the way, we need to get this form, we need to get this other policy, or add this other rider or something to it. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you. Lottie, Luke, Brian, you guys were amazing.